Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Health Without the System. I'm Dr. Tim Scott.
And I'm Mia Scott. Welcome back, everybody. And for our new listeners, welcome for the first time.
Yeah. So we are going to be doing episode 26 today, and we're going to do a little bit of a different episode. So normally we have a topic and we're trying to deliver education. We want to give knowledge. Knowledge is power. We want you to be able to have that. Today, we're going to sort of chit chat about some various things we've talked about, some questions that have come up, and just kind of take it easy for 30 minutes or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of just give you guys some guidance and some help for, future upcoming doctor's appointments with PCP. Maybe you're on edge with your current provider, and just give you a little bit more confidence and some things to help walk you through what your health journey is.
Yeah, I think we're going to do this episode, and we have two more that we're going to do this year. We're hoping to have a guest on and do a hormone episode.
Yep.
And then we are looking to sort of do maybe a little longer kind of summary of what we've done this year, guide people into the holidays, and then we're going to take a break for a few weeks.
Yeah, it's going to be busier on the holidays, work, and all the things. So we might individually pop on for maybe a quick segment, but to be determined. We'll see as that goes.
Agreed. So let's jump into it. I have some different questions jotted down, and let's just kind of talk back and forth about them.
Sounds
So first off, we do talk a lot about how your medical provider can kind of influence labs that you get, sort of your medical journey nowadays. So we have the question, how can patients tell the difference between a knowledgeable doctor, and we mean that in like someone who's maybe in the know and up on
Yep.
current trends in medicine, and maybe one who's just following old guidelines?
Sure. So typically when you hear some providers' responses, that can kind of judge, their open-mindedness versus someone who's a little bit more closed off, and our favorite saying is stuck in the system. So these might be providers that when you are asking questions about your health or journey or medication or anything that you have an issue with, they might be one of those providers that say, well, it isn't in the guideline, or it isn't our standard of care, standard of practice. You'll hear this very often from our patients that address some concerns to us. And so often they're very quickly dismissed. So, when you're looking at providers that you want to have an open mind and say, like maybe let me look into that, or let me check in on some of those things type thing, versus somebody who always says, that's just not how it's done. So that is a number one red flag when I hear my patients say, well, that's what my provider responded back to me with. It can obviously cause some issues with patients and their comfortability level with their provider.
Yeah, I think you'll hear the responses like maybe that's not indicated. Like you said, that's not part of the guidelines. That's not the standard of care. And of course, as a physician, you can't, or a provider in general, you can't practice significantly outside of the standards all of the time. There are certain situations in which it might be okay, or to say, well, maybe this isn't the standard, but it's certainly not safe, or it's certainly not harmful. So I agree. I think maybe their openness to, hear you out, their discussions, are they talking about things that are trending in current health, or are they talking about the same old things from 20, 30 years ago? Because the truth is medicine really does change. They told us in medical school, day one-ish, everything you learn in the next 4 years is going to change by the time your career is over. And I can honestly say that the majority of that is true. There's so many things I do different now, 15 years into my career as an emergency medicine physician than at the beginning. The way I think, the way I go about treating disease and knowledge. And so I think you have to have a provider who understands that, who you feel through your discussion is evolving. And I think that's a good way to judge that person.
Yeah, evolvement I think is huge. When you have providers that are practicing the same exact way they did the day that they left, medical school, typically that is a problem, because as Tim said, things change very quickly. And if they're not up to date on science, and even science is significantly behind what we practice, you can have this get passed down to patients, and it's not the best standard of care. So we know over time, there's way more up-to-date studies. We know evidence gets buried, evidence gets manipulated and all the things. So if you don't have a provider who is looking at some of those current standard treatment or care, then you can have an impact on your own care and your own health.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head that science is a really broad term. And we can talk about this a little bit more in one of the questions later. I think I was going to discuss this, but let's come back to science. Yeah, you
Okay.
mentioned how it can be manipulated, data can be manipulated. Let's come back to that.
Okay.
So that's it for question one.
Yep. Sounds good. All right. So, question two are, what's the best way for a patient to ask their doctor a, hard question, like maybe that they might disagree with their provider, or maybe they're just simply feeling unheard. And we also get this a lot from our patients.
Yeah, I think this kind of comes down to communication. And again, I think ego can play a role here. So, most people are going to have some sort of comfort level with their provider. They're going to have some insight into their provider's personality. We talk to a lot of different patients, and we are not primary care providers. We're a supplemental provider. And so they might say things like, oh, my primary care provider would never do that. Or my primary care provider is really cool. When I ask them to do something, they're very willing. So I think people do have an understanding as to the sort of response they might get from their doctor. But I think this is very important to sort of read the room, to know how to approach somebody, but ultimately remembering that if your doctor can't communicate, that's a serious problem. And doctors shouldn't get mad when you ask them questions. They shouldn't be dismissive when you challenge information. They shouldn't be, angry and like fighting you when you bring in evidence or things that you've heard. It should be open communication. And this goes along with discussing science, but the moment a physician or a scientist stops questioning everything, stops
Mhm.
asking questions, looking for new answers, that's the moment that they're not really a scientist anymore. And now you're just practicing guidelines and you're just sort of going through the motions. You should always be asking the question. You should always be trying to prove your hypothesis wrong. So that's probably one of my biggest things. When you're asking a hard question, you should feel comfortable doing it. And of course, it should be in a way that your provider communicates.
Yeah. A good collaborative care too. And even simply asking the provider, so you might not know this answer, but is there anybody that might be able to help me and see what your resources are? Because they might be able to refer you to somebody else who might be a little bit better helping hands on. And we will also get into what that looks like for appointment times, because we know that appointment times at primary care is one of the biggest issues on why patients are treated the way that they are, is because it's a time crunch. So there's a lot of things that you can bring to the table as well. We are huge on empowering with bringing your own education to your provider. Yes, I know that sounds crazy, but they have so many patients to see in a day, and they might not have downtime. Even in the afternoon, the last thing that they want to do is continue to work at home. So don't be afraid to send them some of your resources that you have found as well. I have patients that will reach out to me and say, what do you think about X, Y, and Z? And it could be something as simple as, I've never heard of that. Let me look into that. And I will collab, somebody else and talk to another provider, and they'll say the same thing. Wow, that's really interesting. I haven't heard of that either. Let's look into it. So you want to have that open mind. And I think you could probably close out that podcast right now saying, if a provider doesn't have an open mind, you're likely with the wrong provider.
Yeah, I agree. How many times would you say you've heard a patient tell you, I've never had a provider like you?
All the time.
Right. And
All the time.
I think that's really cool. I think that is a really good compliment that a provider can get, because what it means is that you are not the status quo. You are receptive to my communication, to my concerns, and you might not know every answer, but you don't let ego drive your decisions. And I think that's probably one of the most important things in medicine. You'll probably hear me say that more throughout this call.
Mhm. And if we don't know, we're going to tell the patient that and say, but let me see if I can find that for you and get back with them. I mean, that goes such a long way. So if your provider is a end all be all, nope, that's the end of that discussion, then, they might not be a good fit for you. You have to have that open communication. You have to have a provider who's willing to listen to your needs and assess, whatever your complaints are. To a certain extent, obviously these PCP appointments can be very short. So just making sure that you're being heard during that time and go from there.
Yeah, and I think that sort of segues into the next question. And we feel we hear this a lot, that people leave their primary care physician's office and feel like they didn't get any answers, that they're in no different place than when they started. So question is, why do so many people leave the doctor's office feeling like they didn't get answers? I do think you alluded to this a little bit with short appointment times. I had the pleasure of speaking with a family practice medicine in the Columbus area recently, and she's really knowledgeable doc. She's been expanding her horizons into more like integrative and functional health. And she said straight up to me, I know I don't want to be in this traditional Western medicine system anymore. I want to be on my own, how we talked about with Dr. Murthy Gokula, concierge medicine, and kind of building new practice models. And those are the kind of people that you really want to sort of, what's the word, maybe jump on the coattails, because
Mhm.
they're going places, they're taking it to the next level of care. But you mentioned short appointment times. So this doctor said she had 22 patients on her schedule for one day. if that's an 8-hour day, that's 3 patients an hour. That's 20 minutes with if there was 0 breaks in between, but you need minutes in between. First, you have to recollect, you have to gather, you have to,
Chart. Yeah.
chart, you have to see what's going on with this next patient. So that leaves theoretically maybe 10 minutes per patient.
Mhm.
Then outside of that, like you said, there's different pressures on insurance, cover different guidelines, do different tests. And really, I think it's just a whole culture. That's why people don't feel
Agreed. And when I
like they
did
have an
my
answer.
yeah, when I did my clinical rounds in a primary care setting, it was exactly what Tim just said. You had about 10-minute appointments. If they went over to 15, 20 minutes, that would roll over into your next appointment, and then the entire day would get behind unless you had a no-show and that you could catch up. But I agree. And a lot of times primary care, and this probably happens to you listeners, they cap your complaint to essentially one complaint per visit. And then if insurance is an issue where you can't go back for a second visit because you've already seen your PCP for that year, or, bi-yearly if you see him twice a year, whatever that, or twice a year, that you can run into these issues that aren't getting solved. And then you get referrals and all these other things. And it can lead to just so many doctors on board that's just not necessary if they were allowed to have longer appointment times, get to some more concerns and really address that. But I get it, and this is exactly what our podcast is here for. It's health without the system, because we understand to our core how flawed our system is, and our patients are the only ones suffering. And I remember when I did clinical rounds for my family nurse practitioner, I remember thinking, there is not a day in my life will I ever truly practice family medicine like this, because it was just a pill for an ill. You would listen to their symptoms. You'd say, okay, these are the complaints. These are the medications I have to offer based on your complaints that you're giving me. And then they would leave with more medication than what they would come in with. And
Every
yes,
time.
every time.
Yeah.
And then behind you was a food pyramid chart. And they're sitting there waiting for you, looking at the food pyramid where you're supposed to eat many grains and very little fat and all. I mean, go back to our food pyramid episode. So it just boiled my blood, because this was about the start where I'm like, this just doesn't feel right. And my background before this was emergency medicine, where I saw extremely sick patients all the time. And I just was like, oh my gosh, everybody's so sick and dying. And you don't even have time to think of like why. And then when clinicals happen, you get into this world of like, we are holding people back from getting healthy, and we're not even realizing we're
Absolutely.
doing that. And that's when it really sparked my brain. And I'm like, I'm going to finish school, but I will take this degree and I will run so much farther than a family nurse practitioner. Because if you are not a part of this new merging model that Tim was discussing, I mean, our healthcare has to change, because it's not healthcare, it's sick care.
Yeah. Why do so many people leave the doctor's office feeling like they didn't get answers? Because our system is not built to give you answers.
Yeah.
Again, we've said this so many times. The system is built to manage illness. It's not built to cure it. It's not root cause analysis. It is take this pill, maintain. And I've said this so many times, and if you can see me visually, it's you truck along until something happens, and then you get a little bit worse. And then you're good for a while, and then you get a little bit worse. And 15 years go by, and where you used to function up here at a higher level, you're functioning down here after 3 levels of worse, and that's your new normal. And this is why so many people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s are at the point where they can't even walk. They don't enjoy their activities of daily living. They can't play with their kids or grandkids. It's just absolutely ridiculous. So
Yeah. And before you say, oh, it's just the perks of getting old, right. But also if you can feel and act and look younger than you ever have, if you continue to treat your body well and support it in the way that we know up-to-date science is showing to do. And it's just not what we see in doctors' offices. Now, don't get me wrong. There are many things that have saved lives. Obviously, emergency medicine, fabulous, scans that detect tumors and awesome things that we
Absolutely.
see in Western medicine. But when you're talking about your standard PCP office where they're calling wellness visits, and I'm going to put my little air quotes, these are just saying, is there anything wrong, side effects, symptom-wise, blood pressure, that we have to toss you on a medication and call it a day. And there is zero time for true educational nutrition, true lifestyle change, but not only because of time, because we are not taught it, period. And what I was taught in school is nothing how I practice now. And there's reasons for that.
Yeah, I'm completely on board with what you're saying here, and it's definitely just a frustrating model. So I think it's going to continue to evolve. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but we just need a different system. And I think that's where telemedicine, where functional integrative medicine, where people who aren't necessarily your primary provider can come into play. This is another thing why I think people feel like they don't get answers. So I worked a shift in the emergency department recently, and I had a patient that was sent in from their cardiology office They were following up with the cardiologist, and apparently they had complained of shortness of breath. So the cardiologist did their whole follow-up examination. There was an EKG, a bunch of notes in there, and then the cardiologist sent the patient to the emergency department because they said, "I'm not a lung doctor." So, and obviously they can't send them to another lung doctor's office from the cardiology office, so they said go to the ER. And those kinds of things. Now, granted, there are certain situations, I completely agree, you need to go to the ER, things are severe, it can't be done in an office. But it's so bizarre to me how segregated medicine is between
Mhm.
subspecialties. Like how the kidney doctor can only look at the kidneys, the heart doctor can only look at the heart, and it's like, how did we get away from understanding that the entire body is connected and everything influences the other organ and
Right.
it's all one
Yeah,
being?
it's like they check it off like, "Oh, my organ looks good, on to the next organ," and they
Yeah,
toss it off to another
and
doctor.
no
No
consideration of
communi
how
yeah,
the organs
communicate.
communicate and how hormones affect the other and
Mhm.
your stress and what is cortisol doing and, the whole liver kidney axis, brain gut axis, like,
Yeah.
there's just so little of that taken into account, and I personally feel that's one of the big reasons why people don't get answers as well.
It is. You gotta zoom out. And not only that, not only on a per doctor level to assess organs, but even our systems don't even talk. I have a family member who got some scans done, and based on insurance, she has to go to XYZ places, multiple different people and facilities. And they literally told her, here's these hard disks. You got to go to this location to have them downloaded so this other doctor can see them. I'm like, we are in 2025. How are all of these systems not talking together? And if you guys can't see charting on the patient, if you can't see, if you're asking the patient, go take these discs that you just put in your purse and have them get uploaded somewhere else, how do you think that continuity of care is? How do you think that, things are going to get missed? It's just it never ceases to amaze me every single day, the things that I hear where I'm like, how are we living like this? We're in with our era, our technology we have systems that don't talk. We have doctors who don't recognize certain organs because it's not their problem. It blows my mind.
Yeah.
So it's a disservice.
I agree. This question, let's not spend too much time, but I do think it's important to touch on. How can someone find a doctor who aligns with their values, whether that's functional, holistic, traditional, maybe the doctor's super evidence based? We've kind of already touched on this and we'll kind of touch on it a little bit more, but let's just sort of hit it for a second here. Is there anything in particular you tell people? Is there anything you would say to this?
It depends on what they're looking for, but usually my go-to for my patients is yes, obviously you have to have some type of PCP or somebody who can order the labs that are screenings. So your typical colonoscopy and things like that I do think that are beneficial to find some things wrong. But then also if you want to branch out to another provider who thinks more on a holistic level or root cause approach, then typically the best place to find that is the Institute of Functional Medicine website. And you can search by your area code or location.
So
And
you're
it will,
talking about
yes,
ifm.org.
yep, ifm.org, Institute of Functional Medicine, or yeah, ifm.org. That should take you to the right place. And you can find a provider in your local
And
area.
there's other websites. I mean,
There
we're
is. Oh,
familiar
yeah,
with that
we're
because
familiar
we
with that.
train through
Right.
IFM, but it doesn't have to be that.
No, it
So,
doesn't. It
yeah.
doesn't. But that's a really good one that has a database
Yeah.
because everybody is going to be in there that can help find a local provider. A lot of these providers are telemedicine, so if you get lucky enough, you can have somebody who's in Texas and can have cross-state licensing and don't have to worry about traveling and going to a certain person who might be really good for you. So I know when we went to the Institute of Functional Medicine, when we had our journey, the amount of people that you could meet too in the forums and swap contacts out there. I mean, they exist. So like Tim said, it's not just Institute of Functional Medicine. There's other platforms out there, holistic other people. So it's not just
Yeah,
IFM, but
integrative
yeah,
medicine, functional
integrative. Yep,
medicine, all
that's a good
kinds of
one.
different providers.
Yeah.
The only thing I want to say to this is I think you could also ask some questions. So here's an example. In IFM, we have they're a really good organization. They provided a lot of different like questionnaires that you can ask patients, different handouts, a lot of different information. And I say that because how many times have you gone to your primary care provider's office and actually received real information? And I'm not saying like maybe one of those trifold handouts that's sitting there about a new drug or like Mia said, the basic food pyramid. I'm talking about like really cool stuff. So for example, when you get a new patient in IFM, they have something called the MSQ, which kind of gauges your entire quality of life right now, this sort of like functional score. There's questionnaires for all different things, diet. We have exercise prescriptions that we can write for people, dietary prescriptions that we can write for people. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think there are some questions you can ask if you're trying to figure out how an office operates you can ask those like, okay, what are the new, when a patient is new to your office, what kind of things do they need to fill out? What kind of questions is the doctor asking before you come in? And if their answer is an insurance form, and maybe like that typical sheet, like, do you have a history of blah, 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 and you check, like, make that line yes or no down the whole thing. Okay, that's not really getting to know you. That's like just reading your diagnosed traditional Western medicine history.
Hmm.
So I think you can ask, like, does this doctor tend to write a lot of standard pharmaceutical prescriptions? Do they incorporate a lot of supplements? Do they have nutritionists, dietitians that they can refer you to? Are there lifestyle changes? These are some questions to try to figure out how someone can align with you.
It's just reminded me of that meme that you shared with me a while ago. That it was just funny. It was a really healthy patient who like had I think it was like a thing that says something about high cholesterol, and then the provider talking to this patient was like morbidly obese, and it was like, here's your statin, your cholesterol's a little high, and it's like it blows my mind that we're like providers are sometimes can be super unhealthy themselves, and yet we're taking their advice. It just reminded me
I
of that meme.
honestly, that's a big thing to me.
It
Like
is.
when you're going to see a provider, and I do not mean this to be discriminatory. I know everybody has their own issues, but
Sure.
if they seem to be morbidly obese, living an unhealthy lifestyle, like you clearly know they're not making the right health
Hmm.
decisions. But I will say this, not all of that is intentional because again, I've heard people very high
Yeah.
in the cardiovascular space, cardiothoracic, people who were saying, like, talking about their journeys, like, I was doing everything I told my patients to do
Yep.
in terms of diet, lifestyle, like everything I thought was right. Follow the food pyramid, eat a low fat diet,
Yeah.
get your whole heart healthy grains. And they're
Cheerios.
like, I was getting fatter. I was going to get my own cardiac stent, my own
Right.
cardiac surgery,
Right.
right? Until they unlocked the cheat code. And the cheat code is root cause medicine.
Yeah.
Stop giving a pill for an ill and address what is the problem.
And
Figure out the problem.
food is medicine, and
Yes.
look at that. I think I looked at the stat the other day. I can't remember what it was, but I'm pretty sure the leading cause of cardiologists for an own cardiologist death is a cardiovascular issue or
Yeah.
disease.
I mean, it
Which
would
is
make sense
crazy.
because when you look,
Yeah.
across men and
Yeah.
women in the later decades,
Right.
it's what's getting most people
Yeah,
anyway.
for sure.
And, I think the root cause of most disease, and especially cardiovascular disease, is insulin resistance. And most people, most physicians aren't really in tune with catching insulin resistance early.
Hmm.
Metabolic dysfunction, mitochondrial dysfunction. That's why we talk about that so much. We preach about that so much.
Sure. Yep. But yeah, to your point, red flags, like you said, overprescribing behavior, those are all definitely things to consider. Dismissive behavior, things like that.
So we kind of already talked about this, but let's bring this up again. There's just a couple more things I want to mention. What are some subtle red flags that a provider might not be up to date or might not be the right fit for you? We did sort of mention maybe their reaction to your
Mhm.
questions or bringing in outside evidence, things like that. Is there anything else you want to add in there? We've kind of touched on this throughout the questions, but let's just hammer it home.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I read people very well. So I feel like I'm one to say like if I can vibe with somebody, quickly or easily, I can probably judge that really quickly. But not all people can do that. So, what's your comfortability level? Do you feel like they're just not really caring? Because you'll have these providers, and I definitely saw that on some rounds where they're just like going through the motions. Like you're just another person. You're just another, a chart to sign. So those are some things that I feel like immediately that is a red flag if you feel like you can't be open communication with them. The other massive red flag, I just thought of this, that I have such a big problem with because it's happened to a lot of my patients where they will say, if you have somebody else on board for your care, I'm dismissing you from my practice. And to me, I'm like, that is the worst thing that I've ever heard. Not to mention,
It's disgusting.
your doctor doesn't know everything. I don't know everything. You don't know everything. And that is how you help people get better is with collaborative care.
Agreed.
I reach out to so many people every day in my community, whether that's I have my central providers that I love speaking to all the time to say, what do you think about this? I have a provider in Columbus that I reach out to often on some really complex patients with the, functional medicine. I have my own personal little hormone specialist. Shout out to Brandy Sikori. I love her. She's amazing. I can reach out to her anytime. You need that collaborative care to provide the best care possible. Because I don't have time to learn everything. I learn stuff every single day, but if your provider is not open to that, immediate gone.
Yeah, and
Immediate.
everybody's journey shapes them. I mean, look at your journey compared to other family nurse practitioners. Look at my journey compared to other emergency medicine physicians. So everybody brings something different to the table, even if they're in your specialty, if they're in a different specialty, whether they're a doctor, a nurse practitioner, a physician assistant, a medical assistant, everybody has something to bring to the table,
Mhm.
right? And I agree that was the number one thing I wanted to hammer home by bringing that up is an unwillingness to collaborate. There is no room for that in
Nope.
2025. There really isn't. And, be dismissing people who are naturopathic physicians, who are integrative physicians and functional just because they're doing this alternative route. They have a different view. They have this root cause approach. It just makes me sick. And I mean, I have essentially, I have very little ego when it comes to medicine. I can think of sometimes I've maybe been a little ego hurt here and there, but I have very little ego. And I think that I get some of the best results when I can humble myself and
Yeah.
do that.
And I find it even more I wouldn't say like concerning, but it's more of a red flag when you have a provider who has done zero education outside of their
Yes.
own schooling. Once
That's
they
a red
graduated, they
flag.
were done. Because
And not just the standard continuing medical
yes,
education.
the
You have to
CEs
check
that,
the
yeah,
box. Yeah.
yeah,
Like,
the continuing education that you literally click a mouse to get a certificate that you can submit to the board that
yeah.
checked all your boxes. But it drives me nuts because if you think about it, I am one provider and I have done thousands of hours outside of my own schooling with outside of when I graduated with IFM, with, functional medicine, with hormones, with GI issues. Like I have done so much outside education. So I am one person. And then I reach out to another person who has done multiple other courses that I have not done. And then this person. So you can see the effect that has that with collaborative care, especially in this day and age where you can go out and have hundreds of hours of these awesome courses that you can take that are more up to date. When you reach out and branch out to your surrounding help, you can pull in so much information from all of these, resources too. So having a collaborative doctor is so crucial, and having a doctor that is open to another doctor on your team is crucial. I can't tell you how many patients I've talked to their own PCP about mismanaged thyroid, and they have no idea what I'm saying. And their line back to me is, I won't order that. It's not standard of care. And I want to be like, yeah, that is why your patient's sick, because you're not ordering the right things.
That's
that can
why they
tell
still
you
feel like
how
crap.
to get better.
That's why you keep saying your labs are normal. I'm sorry. And they keep saying I don't feel well. That's why if you go back to our question, why do I feel like I left a visit and didn't get any answers? So anyway, I agree with that. Another thing I think is avoidance of lifestyle discussions. So if a physician is not hip to, aware of how important it is to discuss lifestyle, if they dismiss, things like food, obviously, first and foremost, if they still think the food pyramid is the best diet, if they don't understand the importance of sleep, mental health, exercise, sunlight. I mean, if they don't understand the body as a whole, that's a big red flag to me.
Yeah. And you'll get stuck on some of these systems. This is just a quick point. You'll get stuck on some of these systems, like Tim said, for cardiology. I can't tell you how many females that are in middle to older age, they're perimenopause, they have an abnormal LDL, PCP or cardiology wants to put them on a statin, and nobody has discussed adding hormones. Like synthetic, your bioidentical hormones to support that female, because lipid panels can definitely shift with that. And instead of saying, let's look at what you just went through, let's maybe add on some bioidentical hormones, support your body through this process, and not put you on a statin, and not have you at greater risk for dementia and diabetes and Alzheimer's and all the things that your cholesterol
Broken
needs
bones,
to make
broken hips,
hormones. Yes. So
it's crazy. I saw a patient in the ER the other day, a 50-some-year-old woman who's like, she's having dysuria all the time, like vaginal irritation, dysuria. And she's like, I keep going and they keep checking my urine and they tell me it's normal and nobody's doing anything about it. I'm like, ma'am, has anyone asked you, like, are you in menopause? And
Yeah.
she's like, no, nobody's asked me that.
Yeah.
She's seen a primary care doctor, a urologist, a general surgeon, because she was going to get a laparoscopic
my
surgery, exploratory laparoscopy. Nobody talked to her about menopause.
yeah, vaginal estrogen.
Yeah.
Vaginal estrogen can decrease your UTIs by over 50% in perimenopause.
Not even
patients.
just UTIs.
Yeah,
I mean, just
right.
vaginal
I'm just saying
discomfort.
that's what just popped in my
Right,
head.
sure.
But you don't use your body is just such an amazing thing, and given the right tools, you can support your body and feel so much better.
The provider, the physician, the nurse practitioner
Yeah.
has to have that knowledge, has to have that inquisitive nature, has to be able to think outside the guideline of statin, UTI treatment. You have to
Antibiotic.
understand there's more.
Right.
Yes.
Right. I totally agree.
So we're already kind of near the 30-minute mark, and I don't want this to go on too long. I want to keep people engaged. I do have a few more questions I want to hit, but this one's important to me. We are going to do a whole podcast on this one day, but I'm going to talk about it right here. So there's a lot of new research every month. GLP-1s, constantly the landscape's changing. Our microbiome, certain different bacteria, how they affect us, longevity, anti-aging. There's information everywhere in the year 2025. How can patients stay informed without getting overwhelmed or misled online? What's the source? What's the truth? Where can people turn?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, obviously, it has to be providers that you trust in general, and people who are more up to date with the science, because that is definitely evolving. You
Well, you
have
just said
you
the key word that I want to talk about in this question too.
was that
The
science?
science.
So
Yeah.
so did I pass the test?
Yeah.
Good deal.
Well, yes and no.
Okay, okay, let's hear it.
So I agree with what you're saying. And I think first off, I would just say, understand that there is room for social media to provide medical education.
Yep.
I think that there's a ton of good people out there. I mean, we both like to listen to Dr. Charlie. How much have you learned from Dr. Charlie?
Talking about Fickenholz?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And he's a chiropractor. There you go, right
And
there. That's how,
I mean, it's not even fair to just limit him
it
to
is
that
not.
box
It is
because he's,
not. He knows
like
so
the
much
Chinese
functional medicine. But
medicine,
that's just
functional
saying,
expert,
don't
right?
dismiss somebody by their licensure with that.
That's exactly what I was going to say is that yes. And how do you tell what's good and bad? Well, there is no easy way. That's why you have to find someone you can trust. Like we are local. We're in Northwest Ohio. A lot of people know us. We started growing our Health Without the System podcast and our company Grassroots. Our goal is to gain trust through transparency, through giving education, through humbling ourselves. Look for people like that. Where are their origins? How did they grow? Like, did they go from 1,000? And you might not have insight into all this, but if you were watching somebody a few days ago who had 1,000 followers and now they have 100,000, something's weird.
They were bought.
They bought. Like,
Yeah.
there's things that are off about it. Are they saying really generic things? Anyway, my point to that is you're not always going to know online where it is, but we have done our homework. We find our trusted resources. You have to fact check. You have to look things up on your own. You have to do some work. And you don't have to have 100 sources. You can have a few that you trust. That's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say is science literacy. I don't have the energy to get into trust the science today, but trust the science is the stupidest term that's ever been uttered because anybody who's anybody in medicine should know you should never trust the science. You should always question the science, always question it. Science is great, but science can be heavily manipulated. In the origin of the scientific method, you would pose this hypothesis, right? And let's say my hypothesis is that the sky is blue. The goal was to do everything on earth you could do to prove your hypothesis wrong. Okay. That was the goal of the scientific method. That was the goal of doing studies and to publish it in papers and journals. That's how it started. Where we are at today is the goal is not to prove your hypothesis wrong. The goal is almost to prove your hypothesis right. You have to have so many egregious things that prove your hypothesis wrong before a scientist today will drop that. So these studies, they're not the same as they were 50 years ago. Science isn't the same as it was before. We're not trying to prove ourselves wrong in the name of science. We're trying to prove ourselves right because we're sponsored by a pharmaceutical company. We have a state grant. Our lab needs that money. This drug needs to come to market, right? So you cannot trust the science. You have to ask questions. You have to get good at understanding at least the basics about paper, or maybe you can download a scientific article and put it in ChatGPT and ask it to help you analyze, ask it to help you to look at things.
Yeah, what are the flaws? What are the biases? Like what could be
There's
wrong?
so much that can influence science, and I absolutely hate when a provider, there's a provider who likes to argue with me online who wants to say, look at the science, look at the data, look at this and that. And I'm like, I have looked at that. And you can look at it in so many different ways, and it depends on who analyzes it and what subgroups did you knock out of it. One, you like the book Estrogen Matters. That's one of the best reviews of hormone replacement therapy that's ever been done. It's a review of all the literature. Well, almost everything against hormone replacement therapy was from the 2002 Women's Health Initiative. Guess what? They thought they were the biggest, baddest, best hormone trial that ever came out. And turns out they were the absolute worst.
It wrecked.
It
20
wrecked.
years of females not getting hormones.
I mean, all women that were on it at the time almost ceased to take it overnight
Providers
based on
stopped it, saying
on the
immediately you're gonna
trial,
get
the
cancer.
results.
And when you look at that, the absolute risk versus the
Relative
relative
risk.
risk.
Yeah.
I mean, when you go back and actually dig into that data, you're like, how in the world
Did this
we
come to
get
publication?
here
Well,
from
and then this
study?
book it actually explains so the
Very
people in
well.
this trial, they did all kinds of manipulative things.
Yeah.
They excluded some of the lead researchers before they published their data. Like some of the lead researchers didn't even know they were that they were publishing this data in JAMA. So that wasn't reviewed. There was one of the researchers on the trial that said, well, sometimes things are so important that the statistical police have to leave the room, meaning they published things that didn't even reach the scientific standard, which is called statistical significance. There's more that we could say about this, but the point is, this was a world changing landmark study that was completely wrong on every single thing that it published that had to do with women's hormones. And it devastated women's hormone treatment for decades.
Yeah, and this is my little segment to say, please, people, if you're in perimenopause or menopause, read the book Estrogen Matters and be an advocate for yourself. I am a huge advocate on supporting replacing your own hormones, bioidentical. Obviously, I'm not a big fan of the synthetic, but it really does have the longevity component into it, better muscle mass and bone preservation and decrease of quite literally almost every single risk factor you can have, dementia,
Cardiovascular disease
risks, right? It's just wild. So please, my female
and quality of
listeners,
life. I mean, sex
yes,
life,
everything.
pelvic
Please,
discomfort, everything.
If you're a female, 100% of females hit perimenopause and menopause at some point in life. Please buy that book, Estrogen Matters. Read it. Talk to your doctor. If your doctor tells you that hormones aren't needed because you're not symptomatic, that is a good thing to say. They're not going to treat you. Go somewhere else. If you're, I just had a
that's a
referral
red
to an
flag.
OB last week, and OB sent me a patient saying, I don't know how to manage these hormones. I'm like,
which
you're an OB.
But I'm thankful for that. Like,
Yeah,
I'm glad
absolutely.
that
Right,
person
right.
Is humbled enough to say, I know somebody who is intelligent and learned in this space. I'm going to send you to them. I trust them, know, and I think that's a cool
for
thing.
that. But going back to that, to say how such a disservice that an OB feels not confident to prescribe hormones.
And that
when it's
is
their
not a
niche.
knock on the OB.
No, it's not
That's
at
a
all.
knock
It's
on
a
the
knock
system.
on the system.
Yeah.
For real, right? It's like, why are we not training everybody on this? Anyway, okay.
Okay. So we'll do an episode on hormones. That's actually the one
Coming up.
that you hope to be doing with Brandy.
Yep.
Brandy's awesome. Brandy Sikori, Renewed Therapeutics. Check out the website.
Yep.
Very cool. Okay. I'm going to skip this question. I like this one. Let's talk about this.
Okay.
What's one question every patient should ask at their next appointment, but probably never does?
You want me to say it?
You do yours. I have some.
What is
you
one
say what you
question
want.
every
Yeah.
patient should ask at their next appointment, but never does?
Yeah. Do you want me to go first so you can think?
Yeah, let me ponder this.
I had a couple that I was thinking when I was putting these questions down. And there's two things that I would touch on. So I have two questions. One would be, I always like to know, is this provider going to have a huge ego? And nurse practitioners, physician assistants, it doesn't matter what level of provider you are, you can have ego, and ego can blind you from science, from evaluating science, from changing your opinions. So I think one interesting question, if you could ask providers, would be, how do you introduce yourself at parent-teacher conferences? Like, if someone walks in and goes to shake the teacher's hand and says, I'm Dr. Tim Scott, I feel like that person's just got an ego. I'm probably not going to gel with them because in that classroom, in that moment, nobody gives a shit that you're Dr. Tim Scott.
No.
Like, nobody.
Where were we when someone said that? Because it's so odd when I hear that out in public.
Yeah.
And it just drives me nuts too. And I don't know why. It's not like it's crazy because it's like me introducing myself, like I said, to like my son's teacher. Hi, I'm Mia. I'm a nurse practitioner. It's like,
okay,
what?
the teacher's like,
thank
okay,
you for
cool.
that extra little segment.
I think it's just an
really
insight.
does make you feel.
I've always had this theory that there's two types of physicians. There's physicians who are a physician because it's work, it's a job. And that doesn't mean you might not enjoy it or be passionate about it, but it's your job. It's not your identity. And there's other physicians who have it as an identity. And those are the physicians that are practicing into their 80s, their 90s. They will not retire. Like, they are a physician through and through to their blood. And not all of them are egotistical. I don't mean to lump everyone in a basket, but I do find that those are the people that tend to have the bigger egos. They're tougher to get along with. And I generally just don't gel with those people. So that was one question.
I do find that very odd.
I think that would be an interesting if you could get like a straight up answer and they didn't know like what you were getting at.
That? But if someone's just straight up like doctor, blah, 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 you're like,
okay.
Yeah. Okay. So
can I do my second one?
Fine.
Okay. So my second one, though,
take it.
is that what you were going to say too?
What were you going to say?
My root cause one.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. You tell me your aspect on it.
So if you're diagnosed with something, well, a little bit different. So yours is root cause, but mine would be if you're given a medication, a statin, a blood pressure medication, XYZ, something for specifically metabolic dysfunction. If you're asking them, what can I do instead of this, or what caused this? And that can tell you their mindset. If it's, it just comes with age sometimes, that is an immediate, nope. Because you can have 80, 90, 100-year-olds not on a single medication based on lifestyle change as well, or have a reversal of a lot of these medications based on lifestyle change. And I'll never forget, it was when we first started practicing in the metabolic space when we first launched Rixa a few years ago. And I had a patient that he came to me and he was on metformin, and I was talking to him about about his metformin, and I said, "Listen, our goal is to get you off of this XYZ." And he goes, "Wait a minute. What do you mean get me off of the metformin?" And I said, "Well, our goal is to have you no longer need this medication." And he stopped and he like, I swear to God, I thought he was going to cry. He's like, "You mean I don't have to take this for life?" I said, "No, you're type 2 diabetic. That's reversible." Like, what do you mean you're, and he goes, "My provider said that I will be on this for life." And he was, and you can tell that his
Like
provider
his mind was blown.
definitely
His mind
told
was
him
blown.
that, because he was, it was like I took away a cancer diagnosis for him. And I'm like, yes, like our goal is to have you off of all medications, specifically things that you can control.
Especially metformin, which
Especially
can impair
metformin.
kidney function and is a
Yes.
mitochondrial disruptor. There are a lot of medicines that are mitochondrial
Yeah,
disruptors.
and
but anyway.
honestly, and and you know what he said? Great, because he said something about, he's like, liquid diarrhea every day. Like he just
Yeah.
didn't tolerate it at all, which is typically the response for metformin.
Yeah.
But it just shows you like they don't think, like it makes my heart like so sad when I have my patients to say like I thought I was going to be on this for life. Their blood pressure medication, metoprolol, that will single-handedly make you feel like you got hit by a freight train. It has the biggest fatigue component to it. I have a lot of patients on it that says like I can't get out of bed. My provider won't change me to a
lot of
different beta
men
blocker.
that say it destroys their sex life.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, well then let's fix potentially the root cause, because if it's just high blood pressure or if it's something that we can fix, then let's change your life with
There's
that.
almost
I mean,
everything can be fixed or significantly improved.
Yeah, I mean, you have some patients who have like major leaky valve or some things that they
Yeah.
might have to have on it, but that's once again an open conversation with your provider to say this medication is not working for me. How can I help fix this on my own, or whatever that looks like? And if they can't answer some of those questions or be able to kind of guide you in the right direction, then they just might not be for you.
I agree. And so my part 2 question does go along with that, but I like the idea of asking your provider, what is the root cause of my diagnosis? So if they say, well, you have high blood pressure, you have diabetes, you have dyslipidemia, and just saying, okay, what, if you get down to brass tacks, what caused that? I don't even really want to hear them so much. I would love to hear them say diet,
Yeah,
lifestyle,
you
that kind of
caused
stuff,
it,
because that
probably.
is true.
Yeah.
But like Mia said, I don't want to hear things like aging. I don't want to hear things like genetics. And also I would love to hear things like maybe some of these other medications. Maybe it is some of the things you've had throughout your life. I'm going to use the word jabs. I don't want to get edited here. Maybe that has played in.
Yeah.
Maybe it was your prenatal history. Maybe it was things throughout your mom's pregnancy that you aren't aware of that led you to this. Maybe it was a childhood full of antibiotics or surgeries that predisposed you to some of these conditions.
Sure.
I would love to hear people actually think about the root cause and talk about it with people. And I would love for patients to challenge their doctor to that question.
Yeah, it's funny. I had a patient, not funny, but this is just how it works. I had a patient a couple weeks ago who was on a statin, and he was a younger person. And when I went over his medication history, I said, okay, I see that you're taking a torvastatin. And he said, yes, was just placed on that not too long ago. It's genetic. And I look up his labs, thinking it's going to be your typical 6, 7, 800, level when it's actually genetic. And it was like just slightly over 200 for total cholesterol. I'm like, this is not genetic. This is no way.
And also you don't need to be honest.
Yeah. And also let's talk about that.
Agreed. So, okay, we're kind of running out of time here. I'm going to kind of leave the last question is going to be a little bit more of a thought. And I just think this is kind of a cool thing to think about, maybe discuss for a moment. But what would healthcare look like if doctors were rewarded for keeping people well instead of just treating disease? We've talked about this before. The medical system that we are in is medication-based, visit-based, numbers,
Kickback.
no outcome. You are not
Incentives.
penalized. You are not penalized or rewarded for a patient's outcome in almost any setting in medicine. What would it look like if we switched to that? Instead of just handing a prescription, if we said, you had to treat this person has to get better. They have to come off of this medication. They have to, lose 15 pounds or else you're not getting paid, doctor.
Yeah, I get it. And that is between a rock and a hard place,
It
man,
sure is.
because going against that, like let's say especially your lower economic populations, when you have those patients who you're saying like I want you off of all of this medication, your statins, your blood pressure, your diabetes, like all of this we can reverse. But then you take it to the food market and go back to the food pyramid, go back to what they can eat, go back to the processed food and how it's engineered to be so addicting. So there has to be so much that changes for this system to actually work in a health benefit because it's, a provider can say, well, I did tell my patient to do this. They're not listening. And a patient can be like, I am trying. I'm eating X, Y, and Z, but it's ridiculously processed. It's not as healthy as they think. So, in order for the system like this to work, theoretically, I think that you would have to have not only a massive uproar in our food regulations in what we allow into our states, like other countries ban, but you also
Oh,
have
you
to
mean
have
like what's happening right now?
yeah, well, it's
To
getting
an
there.
extent,
It's
yeah.
getting there, but my gosh, we're tens of thousands of chemicals behind other countries. But I digress. So not only to change our food standards and what's happening inside our states, but then also you have to give the doctors the knowledge to educate their patient on what health really is and what food is medicine is and using that as a tool. So there's multiple things that need to change here for the system like this to work. And right now it's not. Right now it's a provider learned the system. They were taught an algorithm. This is the algorithm. They got a platter of medications to choose from and they do the checkoffs and say, yep, patient was prescribed a statin due to cholesterol being in this range. It is all a very simple algorithm and very rarely is it really diving into root cause. Now, shout out and props to all of my PCPs listening to this to say that that's not you and that you really educate on food and lifestyle and you're tuned into this. And if you're not, I highly suggest you go out and do your own education and maybe get some own credits on on food and all the things that you can help your patients. But that's what it's going to take for the system to work. And we're never going to see that in this country as of right now. There's
Well,
just no
not
way.
the way it goes, and it takes certain things can move mountains. So one of the other problems is of course the media and social media and the fact that if you are a dissenter, so I
Mhm.
don't think people outside of the medical system understand how much of a almost like a cult that it is. And
It is.
you have to stay in line or you're punished. I
Mhm.
mean, look at the people who spoke out during COVID. Look at the
Oh my
people who
gosh, I
speak
know.
out now. Like you get online and you want to talk about, maybe these cholesterol numbers are off. Maybe everyone doesn't need a statin. Hey, why don't we look at root cause? And you're labeled the weirdo.
Right.
You're labeled,
We're like
the hippie, the
outliers. Yeah.
crunchy people, right? When really you're like, but I'm looking at a human being and I'm
Right.
saying 10,000 years ago, our ancestors hunted, gathered, they didn't eat processed food. And guess what? They didn't have any of the diseases we did today.
Yeah.
And guess
Poor
what? This
chemicals.
statin that everybody talks about, what is one of the things that the producer of the medication, the manufacturer puts on the package? It causes diabetes. It causes insulin resistance. What is one of the leading causes of heart disease? Insulin resistance. What are you taking a statin for? To prevent heart disease. So anyway, the point is we
Yeah.
try to we try to rationalize things. We try to take a different approach. Some people say, I can see that the healthcare system isn't working, and here are things that make sense. And guess what? You get labeled as crazy.
That's crazy.
I've
Yep.
I've lost a lot of friends on social media since I've become more emboldened to speak up about the
Yeah.
way that I feel about medicine. I've argued with there's that one surgeon who I ended up finally blocking her because she's just
Oh my
absolutely crazy. But
gosh.
like the
Yes.
person who demands double-blinded, placebo-controlled studies to show you that healthy food is better than processed food,
Yeah,
that organic, clean
go
eating
ahead
is
and
better
try to
than
get
yeah,
that study funded. It will
right.
never happen. You're not going to patent heads of lettuce and broccoli. Like it's just not going
Yeah.
to happen. So
So
yeah,
agreed.
I totally agree with you. And it's almost comical because years ago when Tim and I first met and I was outspoken about a lot of these topics, when I dove into my own wellness journey and I remember Tim saying like, "Can't we just be normal?" And I'm like, no, we can't.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to deviate and we're going to do our thing. Why? Because I don't want my loved ones on 8 medications by the time that they're 50 and 60 and dying and not have the knowledge to stop that. Like, it's disheartening. So I tell every single patient, like, I probably ramble on my calls more than I can because if they're more than I should, because if there's something that I can help them, even outside of what they're here for, I'm like, hey, by the way, you should be doing XYZ with this. And they're like, what?
It's so hard to stay
Nobody's ever
focused.
said that. I
Yeah.
know. And I'm like, I can't explain. I'm on like I have a certain time frame, like because and I'll do like 40+ minute calls, and that's still
It's
not
still
enough
because we
time.
can't touch on the entire hormone
Yeah,
axis,
but I
thyroid
want
axis,
to.
the microbiome. Like I'll tell people, like I'll literally be like, There's so much I want to say to you about the microbiome, but I'm just not going to have time
Right.
today. But we're going to talk again next month,
Or they'll be like, yeah, I'm a terrible sleep. They're here for, metabolic issues. I'm a terrible sleeper. I just went over their medication. It's an SSRI. Oh, that's new. My provider put me on an SSRI because I'm not sleeping. And I'm like, well, you're 58. When did this start? Okay, we'll do micronized progesterone instead. We'll get you off that SSRI. And they're like, what? Like, what do you mean? And I'm like, yeah, there's different ways to do things that might be more beneficial to your body. But knowledge is power, which is what we preach every single time. So hopefully this podcast helped people. Once again, I can't tell you guys or all these listeners enough that we are not bashing providers. Now,
No.
I will
There are
bash
some,
the providers that are arrogant.
There are some that deserve to be bashed.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. But the majority of people, I get it. We were in the system as well. So this is not to bash anybody. This is not for you to go in guns blazing with your provider and cause a ruckus. But this is also to just question. Are you with the right person? Are they addressing your causes or your root causes? If not, maybe branch off to somebody and have dual care, have a collaborative care. That doesn't mean fire your PCP tomorrow. That means maybe join something else like a concierge medicine where it's a hybrid model. And
maybe
you can
have
get more of people who are
a
educated
metabolic
with that.
clinic like Rixa Health on the side.
Yeah, or Dr.
We look
Gugula.
at labs different. We look at thyroid different. We look at hormones different. Dr. Gugula,
Yep.
awesome guy. We talked about him before in his concierge practice. He doesn't even have to be your PCP, though he is a PCP. He will do it as a primary. So there's so many options out there. But here's one good way that you can gauge it that I was just thinking as Mia was speaking. Are you progressing with your current provider? Are you getting healthier? Or are you just being managed and or getting sicker? And I think that is what you can very simply boil it down to. If you go in with a problem and you leave with another medication, you probably need to reevaluate that relationship or ask more questions.
And not to say that might not be needed for the interim.
Agreed.
But if they say that this is long-term and see how you do, and there's no plan of potentially getting you off all of medication,
no root cause
that's a problem.
plan, workup.
Yeah, looking at things to get you off. So did you just get you off of everything that you can for medication-wise? So to Tim's point, are you getting, that's a perfect point. Are you getting worse with your healthcare provider or not? Because if you're continuing to get worse and every single time you go to the doctor's office, your medication might increase in dose and you're like, man, I'm doing very well and whatever. And now your metformin went from 500 to 1,000, go to somebody else or dual
You're
care,
not doing
dual
good
care.
if you're controlling it by increasing doses. Last point, I swear to God, I'll shut up. I all the time in the emergency department, I ask somebody, do you have a history of high blood pressure? No. Do you take any medications? A blood pressure medicine.
Yeah, 5 of them.
Yeah, people think, and
It's
again,
fixed.
people think if you're taking the blood pressure medicine, you don't have that diagnosis. Yes, you do, and you are managing it with the medication. You are not curing it. So anyway,
yeah, and that last point for me. I just had a patient last week. She's a little bit older woman, but she's doing really well in her weight loss journey. And her last follow-up, she said, I was getting really dizzy. I didn't know what was going on. I called my PCP and I told her, I said, why didn't you reach out to me sooner about this? Because she went to her PCP, had an appointment, and she was on a slew of blood pressure medication. And they took her off like so much already because they're like, you've lost a good amount of weight. You don't need this anymore. And I told her, I said, just like I told you at that follow-up or on your first appointment, all of these medications I expect to decrease or get rid of, eliminate completely. And she was so thrilled. She's like, I cannot tell you how happy I am that I'm getting off of these medications that I thought I would be on for life. So there is an end goal. You have to be willing, but you have to also have the provider that has that open mind and willingness to collaborate with you and your entire team. It is a team. The more
Takes
you
a
have
village.
on, yes, it takes a village, even for your health. The more people that you have on your team, the more that you can be managed. Just make sure that they are all talking to each other and they all agree and can bounce off ideas. It'll take you so much further than a single provider who's closed-minded.
we hope you were able to get something out of this. I know this was a little bit different style today. Hopefully this wasn't boring to you. If you got something out of it, just like every week, please share it with somebody who might also benefit from it. That's how we can continue to grow this and provide what we hope to provide to this community. Just a reminder, this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not medical advice. It's not a substitute for professional care, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult with your healthcare provider before making any changes to your health routine. And remember that you have the power. Join in next week to get more knowledge. Like, comment, share. Mia?
Follow us for more.
Okay, we got 2 more episodes this year. Tune in. They're going to be fun.
All right, sounds good, guys. Thank you very much. Till next week.
Thank you.